pleasure to be here. The 21st century promises to be a difficult one. The issues are many. Food and energy are now viewed as fungible. Growing the food and feed and fiber and fuel demanded by a still expanding and increasingly affluent human population will require innovations, not just in agriculture, but in water and land management, food processing, transportation, and many other areas. Energy drives our economies. How do we transition to energy sources that do not destroy our climate and use a disproportionate amount of the water that we need for people and agriculture without taking an economic beating? Decimating what remains of the tropics forest will as surely exacerbate climate change as it will reduce biodiversity. It's one big thorny tangle. That is, it's about food, people, water, and energy, health. But arguably the biggest challenge of the century is to produce sufficient food for a still growing human population without destroying what is left of the rich biological heritage of the earth. Now, concerns about food security are as old as mankind. Thomas Malthus's eloquent 1798 essay on population crystallized the dilemma for modern times. Malthus argued that humanity was doomed to poverty and famine because the human population grew exponentially, while mankind's ability to produce food could only increase at a linear rate. Curiously, it was about the same time that he wrote his essay that science entered agriculture in earnest, commencing with Priestley's discovery that plants emit oxygen, which he demonstrated by keeping a mouse alive in a sealed jar with a plant. Now, this was followed in quick succession by discoveries about how plants convert simple gases and water into foodstuffs and a definition of their chemical requirements. Over the subsequent 2 centuries, scientific and technological advances drove extraordinary increases in agricultural productivity. When Malthus penned his essay in 1798, the human population in the world was about 1 billion. Science-based agriculture supported a tripling of the global population by the middle of the 20th century and another doubling in the second half of the century. Population experts tell us that it's likely that another 3 billion people will be added to the planet's population before it stops growing. Now here's a sobering factor. The amount of arable land has not changed appreciably for more than half a century, even as the population has doubled. Despite pockets here and there, the overall amount of arable land is not likely to increase much in the future. We are losing it to urbanization, salinization, and desertification faster than we're adding. As well, the development of an agriculture sufficient to feed and clothe the world's current population of 7 billion has extracted an extraordinary toll on biodiversity through the clearing of the world's forests, the diversion of rivers for irrigation, as well as the nutrient pollution of both freshwater and saltwater bodies. The global food price crisis of 2008 took many people by surprise. Continuing growth of the human population has increasing demand for meat, diversion of grains to biofuel production, 3 decades of declining investment in agricultural research, combined with widespread drought to trigger a sudden upward spiral in the cost of the basic staple goods that feed humanity and its animals. But it wasn't a crisis in the usual sense of a singular event. Rather, it was perhaps a tipping point and a harbinger of things to come. 2010 has not been kind. Russia endured its hottest summer ever and banned wheat exports in anticipation of a harvest, something that will impact Egypt tremendously. Pakistan had a heat wave in the spring, followed by a summer with the hottest temperatures ever recorded in Asia. between any single extreme year and climate change. But such extremes are indeed what they predict. Now, crop yields decline with increasing temperature for several reasons. Perhaps the most important is that the temperature optimum for the current crops that feed human beings and their animals is about 20 to 25 degrees and declines much above 30 degrees. And then heat is often, although not always, compounded by drought, as we witnessed in Russia this year. Climate scientists predict that many of the Earth's most populous places will become not just hotter, but also drier. And as sea levels rise, agriculturally important river deltas, such as the Niles, will shrink. Well, that's not a cheerful picture, and here's what we need to do in the 21st century. People talk about sustainability. It's a tall word. We must reduce agriculture's ecological footprint, decrease agriculture's use of fresh water, reduce agricultural pollution of the air, land, and water, and adapt crops to hotter and, in many places, a drier world. And oh, by the way, we need to do this while doubling the food supply and powering our cars increasingly with biofuels. A tall order. Fortunately, and just in the nick of time, scientists have developed all of the knowledge base. Even in the course of my own career, I was one of the first plant molecular biologists. The amount we've learned about plants in the last 40 years is astonishing. And we've also developed a technical toolkit to tackle these daunting challenges to expanding food and fuel production in the face of a shifting climate. The late 20th century witnessed a genetic revolution with the invention of recombinant DNA technology, the explosion of genome sequencing, and the development of techniques for the reintroduction of individual genes into plants and into animals. Today, it's possible to use these techniques to modify crop plants and animals, and domestic animals, very precisely, adding or subtracting just one or a few well-characterized genes. Now, genetically modified crops have been in commercial production for more than a dozen years, and GM crop acreage has increased more rapidly worldwide than any previous crop introduction. In 2009, GM crops were grown in 25 countries on 134 million hectares. But most importantly, 13 of the 14 million farmers growing biotech crops, that's 90%, are smallholder, resource-poor farmers. Unfortunately, the steep regulatory barriers that were set up initially because of fears of risks to biodiversity and human and animal health are still with us. None of those postulated risks has materialized. They remain hypothetical after all these years, while the benefits are real and substantial and could be much larger if we could just bring ourselves to demolish the regulatory barriers we've erected around GMOs out of unfounded fear. Given such advances and many others in both knowledge and technology, I think the challenges I outlined earlier to increasing food, fiber, feed, and fuel production are not impossible ones. Of course, our current crops need to be made more tolerant to heat, drought, flood, salinity, pests, and diseases. But the greater challenges to agriculture is to use land we now consider useless and water we now consider unusable, all powered by sun and wind and advances in science and engineering. Aquaculture is part of the answer, but as practiced today in many places, aquaculture exacerbates nutrient pollution of water. In the larger scheme of things, we need to view agriculture as a system that encompasses ecology, hydrology, and energy, not just food and fuel production. That brings me to the reasons we're here. The New Nile project promises to be the first truly large-scale effort to establish an integrated desert agriculture and aquaculture system based entirely on seawater to produce food, feed, fiber, and perhaps even fuel. While elements of the system are well established, there's much research to be done as well, both biological and engineering research. The entrepreneurial engine behind the New Nile project is Energy Allied International and the energetic head of the Cairo office, Tamar perhaps it's worth retelling how it started. From 2007 until August of this year, I served as the Science and Technology Advisor to the U.S. Secretary of State. Increasingly concerned that our agricultural establishment was not yet coming to terms with what the rapidly increasing impact of climate change would mean, I organized a workshop for the U.S. government around the subject of climate change and agriculture in 2009. Dr. Justin Grubich, now an AUC faculty member, was then working in my office and researched and laid the groundwork for my subsequent invitation to Dr. Carl Hodges, president of the Seawater Foundation, to participate in the workshop as a speaker. Now, by the time the workshop took place, Dr. Grubich had departed for his new faculty position at AUC. Now, last year when I was in Egypt for a meeting of the trustees of the Library of Alexandria and stopped in Cairo for meetings with the New Nile Project, and with the New Nile Project had arranged with the Ministry of Agriculture, I asked Tamara to arrange for me to meet with the Desert Development Group here at AUC, and sent off several emails to Justin, whom I hadn't seen since he left the State Department. Well, he didn't respond to any of my emails, and I was pretty resigned to missing the opportunity to reconnect with a valued colleague. Meanwhile, word of my visit had somehow gotten around the university, even up to then President Arnold, whose acquaintance I had made at the groundbreaking ceremony of the new King of the University of Science and Technology, where I'm now working part-time. President Arnold summoned Justin to the meeting, but told him nothing about it. You can imagine his surprise as he flew in the door and his later delight in making Dr. Hodges' personal appointments. Since then, Justin and many others here have advanced the relationship between AUC and the New Nile Project, now the New Nile Company, culminating in the present signing ceremony. Now, MOUs are important beginnings, but it's people and the work they do together that will make this a success and an example for the whole world. I wish you all a hugely productive, important, and interesting collaboration. Thank you.